we're done this computer. So, okay, so we're going to talk about the unit, DPSI Unit 1, and I'm just going to start my slideshow. So, as I was explaining just a minute ago, we're going to, over the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at the different units of the exam. So this week we're going to look at Unit 1. Then next week we're going to look at sight translation, and then the following week we're going to look at written translation. So by in 2 weeks time, really, you'll have a good understanding of the full examination. You know, the format, what it consists of, well, what will be expected of you. We'll also give you some kind of mock papers, either past papers or mock papers, so as to give you a rough idea as well of the kind of formats, length, level of difficulty, all of those kind of things. So today we're talking about Unit 1, and Unit 1, as I mentioned last week, consists of 2 parts. Both of these parts are assessed together as a single unit. So even though there's 2 parts, you don't get a grade for each part, you just get 1 grade overall for the units. Part A is consecutive interpreting, and it lasts for roughly approximately 20 minutes. And part B is simultaneous interpreting and lasts for approximately 10 minutes. Now, once again, this is a new format. So this format just came into force this year in June. So, before previously the exam followed a different format. So this is something a little bit new. So some of the role plays you're going to be using for practice are still in the old format. And basically, in the old format, you had 2 role plays. So Unit 1 was made of 2 role plays, and each role play had a consecutive section and a simultaneous section. That's no longer the case. Now you've got 2 separate parts. One is consecutive, one is simultaneous. Okay. So when you get the role plays, when you look at the role plays later tonight, don't get confused. That's just because they're still in the old format. We didn't have time to rewrite them for you. Also worth mentioning that in part B, you will have to do simultaneous interpreting both ways. Okay. So both into English and both into your other language. So you'll have about 5 minutes of interpreting into one language, and then another 5 minutes of interpreting into the other language, for 10 minutes in total. We get the topics for Unit 1 for both parts, so for part A and for part B, at the beginning of June. So this is the only part of the exam, once again, where we do get the topics in advance. And these are actually the law topics. We ignore that, and these are the health topics from June last year, just to give you an idea. So last year, this was the first one. A patient's daughter has come to talk about their mother's hoarding disorder. The GP gives information about the disorder, its causes, and what may help the patient. And then part B, the simultaneous interpreting. And the scenario was, a patient is visiting a specialist to talk about their baby who was born with Down syndrome. The specialist explains the potential health problems associated with Down syndrome. Okay, so so this is what the candidates got 2 weeks in advance. This exact text. Okay, so it's as short as that. So it's just a little paragraph, a couple of sentences, but it gives you a lot of information about the the exam already, and gives you a little bit of focus to kind of work on your terminology to make sure that you know those topics inside out. It is important in the 2 weeks leading up to the exam. It is important to spend as much time as you can, really, researching, these broad topics, and making sure you know everything there is to know about hoarding disorders, and generally anxiety disorders, and symptoms and treatments. And once again, if you read the scenarios carefully, they kind of hint at what you need to kind of look at as well. So a patient's daughter has come to talk about their mother's hoarding disorder. It's the daughter talking about their mother. It's not the patient, it's the daughter. So what is she likely to say? She's likely to say she's doing these, and she's doing that, and she's doing that. So symptoms, basically, or out kind of external signs. I haven't actually read the paper from June 2000, from June this year. So I don't know if that's what it said, but that would have been my guess. The GP then gives information about the disorder, so there'll be some sort of description, or this is what it is. Quite often he might talk about this is what quite often triggers it, and so on and so forth. Or in fact, he does mention here the causes and what may help the patient. So then he talks about treatments. Yeah, so we've got the kind of three broad categories here. So 2 sentences, and it tells us all of that about the topic. So it tells us about symptoms. There's going to be some sort of symptoms described, some sort of general description of the condition and its causes, and treatments. So rather than just kind of reading generally about hoarding disorder, then you'd kind of go and study the topic bearing in mind that you need to kind of cover those three kind of aspects of it in quite a lot of detail. So this is where it becomes important to read these scenarios critically and really trying to get the most information possible out of them. And obviously, as part of the course, we help you to do that. That's why we're here, to kind of help you, do that. But we're not perfect, and we don't have the papers in advance. So so don't just rely on us. Don't just rely on me and Olga and Magda and Peter to do it for you, because we might miss something important, and sometimes we do. Normally we quite good at kind of researching them in detail, but sometimes we miss things that we hadn't thought about that you might notice in advance. So important tips for the exam: prepare the topics in advance, as I was mentioning there. Look confident. So you're talking a little bit about these earlier, about the importance of in fact, we're talking about it last week, the importance of looking confident in the exam. So as I mentioned that last week, it's a practical exam. You're given a role play. You literally just have to interpret between two people, one speaking in English and one speaking in another language, and you're assessed on how well you do that. So you're not assessed on how many hours of professional interpreting experience you've got under your belt, or you're not assessed on your previous qualifications. You're not assessed on how good your English is even, or how much medical terminology or how many glossaries or how many terms you've memorized. No, you're assessed on how well you perform that task. And it can be a subjective assessment, as I've already mentioned. So looking confident, even if you don't feel confident, can go a long way in helping you pass the exam. Okay, so make your utmost to kind of sit straight. In the exam is not so visible because you're just in the camera, but still important to kind of sit straight, behave in a professional manner. Don't start going. Lots of candidates do that in the exam. Just nerves, and just kind of it just comes out spontaneously. Make sure you don't do things like that. Make sure you don't start mumbling to yourself saying, "Oh, I don't know," or just things like that, because straight away it tells the examiner that you don't know. You've just said it. Okay, don't start going, "Oh, what was that again? Oh, I knew that word. Oh, I knew that I read that yesterday." Oh, the examiner doesn't care. They care whether you know the word in the moment or not. And it's human nature as well. Quite often, trying to kind of excuse, trying to show, look, I know what it is. I just can't remember. Don't do that in the exam. Okay, just confident. Okay, I don't know it, but I just say something. Yeah, and I do it confidently. Have pen and paper ready. Important, yeah. So, and I would encourage you to start doing that as of today. Pen and paper at the ready, because you might want to take notes. The exams are designed in a way so as to always include some sort of numbers, sequence of things. Quite often in the health option, they can be a list of symptoms. Quite often could be a list of potential conditions that the patient has, or a list of treatments. Quite often numbers, just straightforward numbers or dates. Take a 10 milligram a 10 milligram tablet 2 times a day for 3 weeks. Yeah, and it's you'd be surprised how many people will misinterpret the numbers in that simple sentence, because your brain is focused on conveying the linguistic meaning, and your brain automatically dismisses part of what you're listening as unimportant and kind of filters things out. And numbers is one of those interesting things that your brain kind of tends to filter out, and because you focus on something else, is then easy to just make a mistake there. And quite often you don't realize you're making a mistake there. And I can tell you from experience, we see that kind of mistake a lot in the best professional interpreters. So pen and paper ready, and get into the habit of, as soon as you hear a number in a role play situation, just write it down. Okay. If you want to take additional notes, that's great. We're going to look at some basic note-taking techniques later in the course as well to kind of help you with that. You don't have to. It depends on your interpreting style, but if you do, actually that's good practice. But at the very least, write down the numbers. Or if you've got a list of items or things, write down the list. If you don't have time to write down the list, at least you write down how many items there were in that list, to make sure you don't miss any. So there was 5 things, just write down 5 or 5 lines, or whichever shorthand you want to use. And then when you're interpreting, you will know whether you missed something out, and you can ask for repetition if necessary, for example. So anyway, have pen and paper ready. Some examiners will actually ask you whether you've got pen and paper at the start of the exam. Okay, and if you don't, you mark down. So even if you don't want to use it, have it there with you, because it's an exam requirement. Don't be afraid to ask for repetition during the consecutive interpreting unit, of course. So the second part B, the simultaneous is simultaneous. There's no repetition. In real life, yeah, sometimes in some scenarios you can ask for repetition, or you can ask for clarification, depending on the setting, but not in the exam. So the way the exam is delivered for the simultaneous part, so for part B, so for this part here, basically it's a pre-recorded audio file. So they share an audio file with you, and you just play it, and you're not allowed to pause or stop the audio file. So it just keeps going on. So obviously you can't ask for repetition, because it's just a recording. But in part A, in the consecutive interpreting, you are allowed to ask for repetition. So if you don't understand something, please ask for repetition. If in doubt, please ask for repetition. If you've forgotten, please ask for repetition. You do not get marked down for asking for repetition. Okay? You do not get marked down for asking for repetition. You only get marked down if the examiner thinks it's excessive. Yeah. So if the examiner thinks it's becoming a bit excessive now, you're asking for repetition a few too many times, then they would mark you down for that. But in order to be considered excessive, it needs to be a lot, and then quite often people ask, okay, so what's the number? What does that mean? 5, 10, 20, 30 times? What is it? It depends on the examiner. Once again, depends on the context of the exam, However, I always say that, and this is something that people worry a lot about. So that's why I'm kind of spending a little bit of time on this point. I would argue that it's better to ask for repetition and get marked down, but then interpret properly, than just interpreting incorrectly. Because if you interpret incorrectly, you're going to get marked down, and if it's a serious mistake, you might get into serious trouble. Yeah. Whereas asking for repetition, even if the mark you down is just a minor markdown, that's not going to fail you the exam. Asking for repetition is not going to fail you the exam, unless you ask for repetition so many times you run out of time. But then you'd need to be really struggling, to be in that kind of situation. So in other words, long story short, do not worry about asking for repetition. Just get that notion out of your mind. If you need to ask for repetition, ask for repetition. Simple as that. Important dates. We don't have the dates yet for the exam this year, because we started the course quite early. So registration closes probably beginning of April. If it's the same as it was this year, and then so by the beginning of April, you need to make a decision whether you're going to go for the exam or not. And once again, just by doing this course, you're not forced to go to sit the exam. If you don't want to sit the exam, if you don't feel prepared, if you've changed your mind about being an interpreter, if you don't have the money, if you don't want to spend the money, whatever your reason is, you don't have to do it. Okay, obviously, you know, it's great if you want to do it. That's why we're doing the course. But if you don't, for whatever reason, if you're a bit reticent about sitting the exam, don't do it. You know, that's absolutely fine. And if you decide not to sit the exam, please continue coming to the course and don't just disappear. You know, feel free to continue coming to the course until the end. So quite often people think that the moment the exam registration dates the moment the exam registration is closed, then if they don't go to the exam, then they can't come anymore. No, that's not true. You know, you paid for the course, so you're entitled to attend every single session. And I would recommend you do attend every single session if you can, and if you want. Obviously, if you don't want to, that's fine. But if you want to, then please do attend every session, whether you're sitting the exam or not. That's not important, because you know, even if you don't sit the exam, at least you'll get some experience and some practice, and you know, and develop your skills, so you can go out and do interpreting to a good standard, whether you've got the diploma or not. The role play topics are published at the beginning of June 2023, roughly 2 weeks in advance. Depends on the date of the exam, but roughly 2 weeks in advance. Probable exam dates: the oral units will probably be on the 3rd week of June, and the written units will probably be on the 4th week of June. Once again, we don't have exact dates for these yet, but I would expect we'll know well, either December or beginning of January. It might be beginning of January, but we'll see. As soon as we find out, we'll let you know. The dates are set by the CIOL, by the Chartered Institute of Linguists, and they're firm dates, so they will not change for any reason. So once the dates have been published, that's it. And there's also no point messaging the institute saying, could you please avoid this date because I've got commitments, because they've got about 1,000 odd candidates a year or so. So they won't accommodate your personal circumstances. And the exams are the same for everybody all over the country. So the dates are the dates. You know, so you just have to kind of bear this in mind, as I was saying last week, for booking holidays or any other kind of important commitments you may have, or even, you know, considering whether you're going to register for the exam or not. If it clashes with something else you already have and you can't change it, then, you know, maybe you just have to skip the exam this year. And then the results are released mid to end of September 2023, normally around about the middle, but sometimes towards the end of the month. Okay, and then these are some links which are also on your homework sheets, which which are explained in your homework sheet. So actually you can just ignore these, you know, this here. So I'm going to stop the recording now because we've come to the end of that presentation.